you know, your product, if you see that and say, okay, not bad. My numbers were down 15% and I wasn't sleeping. You probably don't have a problem here. Right? And down in the level 3 is you'll see, and that's the appendix with all the numbers. You can go down, particularly to retail trade, and see what that was over 12 months. So it gives you an idea of patterns and so forth uh, within those groupings. But having said that, I have a bit of a caution over the next months, could be years, could be another, whenever the next election is in the States. But the ripple effect caused by tariffs has created a chaotic landscape. Importers stockpiling products to dodge potential tariffs can inflate short-term demand, while others adopting a wait-and-see approach can lead to temporary stagnation. So the numbers are being distorted, particularly demand. And in here, in what is known as the bullwhip effect, is customers start ordering, retailers then double that amount to make sure they have stock. Distributors and wholesalers then go up another 5%. And within a few days, the manufacturers are starting to produce more. But it all multiplies out, which they call the bullwhip effect. And it goes in both directions. Demand drops, retailers lower their orders, and so forth. So you need to be cautious of what's going on in the market in that effect. But what I found looking at a lot of the numbers over years is that Canada doesn't quite follow what everybody else is saying. Back in September, everyone was predicting that imports would be very high because of the problems in the Red Sea and other problems with shipping. The Gold Week, which is Golden Week somewhere in September, was supposed to be moved back, and a lot of the shipping, even for Christmas, was expected to start in June instead of September. That never really happened in Canada. So again, this is a caution. Right now, the numbers January to March are probably too early to use them to predict anything or to make any big decisions. Now, a few other things, and I guess I'm not making life any easier, but it was kind of a rule of thumb that the Canadian US dollar exchange rate moved with the price of oil. The price of oil went up, the Canadian dollar got better, just simply because Alberta sold oil in US dollars. So they would then sell the US dollars, buy Canadian to pay out in Canada. But that's not what's happening. You can see the exchange rate. Now it's dropped down to 14, I think, in the last couple of days, and oil has gone up. But what you see is the Canadian dollar, in a way, was strengthening while crude is dropping. So there's a lot of different things that are happening and affecting the exchange rate than what we're used to. And I picked up a few comments. Is stocks are down on the U.S. economy. The U.S. dollar is the same as down. Demand for U.S. bonds is also shrinking. And this isn't supposed to happen. All right? Not all three at the same time. And I thought this quote was good by a Republican mega donor, the CEO of Citadel, that the United States was more than just a nation, it's a brand. the damage is clearly beyond repair. I think his donations to the Republican Party may go down. So there are so many things. It's hard to sit back. And if you have a rule of thumb that used to work before, I would question it right now. And one of the others, staying on foreign exchange, because it affects everybody in some way, is that it's more than just trade that's going on. And if you can think of if people are losing confidence in the brand, what else could change? And what this is showing is that foreign exchange reserves, 58% of the world's foreign exchange reserves are in US dollars because it was solid. International debt or bonds, 66% were denominated in US dollars. So you can see any buying or selling in another currency would require an exchange. International loans, 53% of international loans are denominated in US dollars. Global payments, 48% were in US dollars. And this is a whopping 89% of foreign exchange turnover. One side of that exchange was US dollars. So you can imagine that all this volume coming, even if you took out trade, would be huge. And the demand for US dollars would be enormous, even if there was no trade. So there are just so many factors. What if, okay, what would be the exchange rate if the US dollar had to rely on its own economics rather than the fact that it was the dominant world currency? I can't answer that, by the way, but I was going to draw a line halfway through at least, but I, it would be an interest. I guess somebody can do the calculation, but if that starts changing, if brand drops and the confidence drops, these numbers are going to change dramatically. So on trade, I thought it was interesting. There was a fellow on one of the TV services, and they were talking about trade deficits and so forth. And he made this statement: I have a trade deficit with McDonald's. I pay them money, they give me hamburgers. And what the point he was trying to make is a trade deficit isn't inherently bad. But you need revenue to pay for the hamburger. If you pay for the hamburger with a credit card and you don't pay your credit card, you have a budget, deficit. All right. And you need more revenue. And what I'm looking at is you need more revenue for a government. That means taxes. And it really doesn't matter where the meat comes from. All right. So talking about trade deficit and everybody, oh, this is terrible and having a surplus is good. That's not necessarily true. Okay. And you have to look product by product and other types of revenues and so forth. But I thought it was a good point he made. This is just a note. The old formula that Trump used really doesn't matter as it's kind of thrown out the window the day after. But I think one of the comments I have is normally a country that is trying to balance trade also wants to increase exports. Mm-hmm. Trump makes very little or no mention of exports or increasing exports. Products and American exports. So that's I enjoy this. I'm kind of poking some fun with pictures and so forth. But for instance, a laborer in Cambodia earns $10 a day. Earning $10 a day is unlikely to purchase a Ford F-150 or a furnace or a washing machine made in the US. Cambodia exports are predominantly textile goods, which make up approximately 70% of its total exports. Trump's original 49% tariff on Cambodia raises the question, is this an attempt to onshore a $10 a day labor, or is it simply another tax? And you'll see I'm saying tax quite a bit. Again, on exports, if you are into exports, you try and create products you can export and to markets that want to buy it. And that gives the same cars, the size of the cars, vehicles in Europe compared to, I'm not sure if it's an F-150 or what, but they don't buy it. So it's not exports or trying to get exports. Now, getting on to China, China isn't, of course, without blame. Chinese offshoring is huge, and also their controlled currency. Chinese offshore production to other countries began as a strategic response to mitigate risk from US tariffs and trade restrictions. Over the past decade, Chinese companies have shifted part of the manufacturing process to countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Mexico, and countries in Africa and South America. This approach allowed them to maintain cost efficiency while navigating trade barriers. And that could be whoever is providing information to Trump, as why as there was a very broad, almost shotgun approach to tariffs. This strategy enables China with minimal capital costs to benefit from tariff exemptions under most favored nation status and low labor costs. This also allowed China to preserve core operations. While labor-intensive tasks are outsourced, complex, high-value processes such as fabric production, design, or precision manufacturers remain in China, retaining control over quality and intellectual property. Very calculating, and of course, very effective. Now, the currency control, as everyone knows, I think that China controls their currency. It's not in any size traded internationally, but they keep it at about a 5-6 to 1 to the US dollar. So they market against the US dollar, which I've seen estimates that 3 may be a real number. So they're keeping their the cost of their goods down by controlling their currency. Now, I always like Trump kept saying all along that he has all the cards. But China has a big card, which is foreign currency reserve. When we looked at it in the previous slide, is they're sitting on something just less of $1 trillion. And Japan has, I think, 700 million. Even Canada carries $300 to $400 million in U.S. reserves, which are basically U.S. T-bills, bonds. And like we talked about in the previous slide, if that starts dropping and the demand starts dropping, these T-bills are sold in auction. And what it is, of course, the person who bids the lowest interest rates gets the bonds. If that starts going up, then the cost of the US deficit, funding the US deficit, can go up dramatically. Things just keep getting worse. One of the other things, and not many have talked about it, but I think it's key. I think it's key to why Trump has so much support from a lot of the digital uh, uh, companies like Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. The existing international tax system does not capture the digital economy. Under current international tax rules, multinationals generally pay corporate taxes where production occurs rather than where users are located. The digital service tax replaces some existing forms for taxing multinationals. Now, there are 44 countries right now who have implemented and are implementing digital service tax. But there are problems with it. Many of the countries have mixed digital service tax with their VAT or GST, and that causes some problems. Because if it's an internal one, then they pay taxes as normal. So it is sometimes negative against digital services within the home country. And all of it is dependent on available data and calculations. Canada has imposed a digital service tax of 3% on digital service revenue. Taxable revenues includes revenues derived from online marketplace services, advertising services, social media services, and the monetization of user data. Now, if you think about it, you just say, well, where does that information come from? So there is a big problem there. And I have some examples, or I have one example a little later on of how these things actually work. Now, what they looked at is all of these problems with the digital service tax was going to be improved with the global minimum tax. Now, the G20 OECD introduced a global minimum tax of at least 15% on multinational enterprises. This measure aims to ensure that large corporations pay a minimum tax level of tax, regardless of where their profits are earned. And as in the previous saying, currently profits are taxed where the value is created. And this makes some sense when you're talking about a product. If you make the car in Germany, the German company gets taxed. Okay? The car may hit a tariff coming into the country, or it may be charged VAT or GST within the country where it's sold, but it's not the big piece is going to be paid in the country where the car is produced. Now, one of the first changes that the Trump administration did, they withdrew from negotiations on the global tax agreement. Right? This appears to be contrary to Trump's desire to increase government revenues, as many large multinationals avoid U.S. taxes by establishing offshore corporations. And I'll show you in the next slide just how easy that is if you haven't looked into it yourselves. So they want a fair distribution of profits and taxing rights to the market where businesses have activities and earn profits. So if you earn profits in in one country, you're going to be paying corporate tax. So, line, profit allocation regardless of physical presence. The global minimum tax is what is in there to avoid shifting to lower tax jurisdiction, which is often called tax avoidance, or it's people come out and look at tax havens. But tax havens operate all over. They operate provincially, actually, because Alberta has a lower corporate tax rate, provincial corporate tax rate, than Ontario. Does that make Alberta a tax haven? And they just want to stabilize the international tax system. But just as an example, and I apologize, there's a lot of words on this screen, is Apple is actually not only has come up with a lot of new products, one of them is tax avoidance. Apple routes a sizable portion of its profits through countries and states that allow it to pay low tax rates. The Cupertino, California-based company has a tiny subsidiary in Reno called Brayburn Capital that manages and invests much of Apple's enormous cash reserves. California has an 8.8, and this is California, state corporate tax. Nevada has 0, and Nevada has no capital gains tax. So if you imagine the billions of dollars that are surplus, or that Apple has surplus, and there's no capital gains whatsoever, and there's no corporate tax. Apple is also a pioneer of a tasty sounding accounting move called double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. It involves routing profits through subsidiaries in Ireland and in Netherlands before sending it on to the British Virgin Islands or another Caribbean tax haven. In all, about 70% of Apple's profits are housed overseas. And you say, well, come on, Apple makes their phones in China, they import it. But it's how they deem, and this is the digital change, it's how they deem their profits and what their values are. Much of the revenue for Apple comes from sources like patents and digital downloads. Intangible things you can easily sell from anywhere in the world, particularly places that offer good tax arrangements. When people in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East buy songs and movies from iTunes, the sale is recorded in a nondescript office in Luxembourg, which is a notorious tax haven. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development have made it clear nearly 240 billion US is lost in tax avoidance by large companies, more than half of which are American. Now, why do all these companies support Trump and quickly fell into line as soon as he was elected? That's a lot of money. There's one cartoon where they asked the CEO of Apple why he used so many, as it was the most profitable company in the world. Why did they use these tax havens? And the simple answer is because I want to be the most profitable company in the world. And that's how you do it. And you see this all over. In here, it's showing, and these are huge. And as I said, I'm talking a lot about taxes, not tariffs. But these are truly huge sums of money. So it works from state to state, province to province, and so forth. So what I put forward is, what is Trump's objectives? It's to increase government revenues, to reduce the government budget deficit, or at least cover his promised tax cuts. If there were no government deficits, we really wouldn't be talking about trade deficits. There's no need. There's nothing inherently wrong with a trade deficit as long as you're earning money somewhere enough to pay for them. But and I look at Trump's, there are conditions. It can't be called a tax, and it can't hurt his major supporters. So you take out the minimum world corporate tax, and you've got to get rid, okay, uh, and it can't be called a tax, so let's call it a tariff. Note, government employee cuts and cuts to aid also fit this scenario. We're trying to balance the budget. Okay. But remember, increase in exports is not part of this scenario. So it's taxes, it's revenues. Now, what I look at what's going to happen is most countries will accept a 10% tariff on all goods with virtually no reciprocal tax. So if you're looking at the future, I would say you would think about that and see how you can organize your trade and business, understanding that this may be something that is sitting there for the next 3 or 4 years. The EU will agree to reduce or eliminate tariffs on American goods. Goods subsidized in the US will then be subsidized in the EU. And those are subsidies in the US are huge. I believe the last month webinar report we looked at, in the agribusiness in the US, they make something like $3 billion in profit, but they also receive $3 billion in subsidies. I'd say politicians bought and paid for. China will slightly adjust their exchange rate mechanism and agree to stop offshoring to avoid taxes. Now, the 10% tariff may be 15%. I saw one thing this morning that anything over 20% stops volumes, reduce volumes significantly. So you don't want more than 20% on China, because then there's nothing to tax. The products have to come into the country to effectively be taxed via tariffs. And they put the individual doing the calculations, fairly well known, I forget his name now, economist, puts that at about 20%. At that, anything above that, and volumes will drop dramatically. Developing countries will agree to reduce tariffs on American goods and label exports partially produced in China. Of course, both the exchange rate and the labeling, these things are virtually impossible to monitor or quantify. On the tax side, all countries, including Canada, will agree to suspend the digital service tax and or the global minimum tax. The basic reason is, well, the current structure that they have doesn't work without the Americans' participation. because that only works with an exchange of information. And if the US isn't playing ball with the setup, then it's not going to work the way they have it structured right now. Uh, all countries will agree to eliminate non-tariff barriers, which they've all done before, and everybody throws up their hands and say, we don't do that. So again, no real change. And Canada will agree to renegotiate NAFTA or a US-Canada free trade agreement, and this should take 12 to 18 months. But when you look at the taxes, and you look at it and the non-tariff barriers and so forth, subsidies, embargoes, quota, currency manipulation, tax relief. If you are in the business of making money off the government, um, without these with these pieces in place, it changes the whole structure. Uh, there are probably more corporations in Ireland than they are in the rest of the Euro uh, community, and that's specifically taxes. So they can do something, but there's always a little piece somewhere else. It's possible for everybody, with all the big players, with the exception of the U.S., to come out with a strategy to try and cut this off. But unless they do that, and actually I heard Carney make a comment on that, is he actually mentioned the minimum tax, uh, world minimum tax. Unless they do that, every company in every country is competing for both revenue, corporate revenue, and for capital. And companies who are looking for capital and they don't take advantage of some of these pieces are not going to get the capital. The investors will simply go somewhere else. So you're competing for investors. And as long as this setups keeps running, you're going to have to compete. You're going to have to play by the rules that are in front of you. And we'll see how they go. And that also comes back to when a few comments that the European government said is that they may not respond by taxes. They may respond by tariffs. They may respond by taxes. And these are the pieces that they're talking about. But meanwhile, other countries will begin restructuring their industries. How do you get back that? You've got to get, nobody thought this type of thing would happen. So you've got to look at your industry, supply chain, and trade relationship to strategically position yourself for negotiations in first. If this creates, as it undoubtedly will, it'll create a certain level of increased uh, revenues for the U.S. government. The next revenue government, even if it's Democrat, are not going to cut them immediately. There's going to be some negotiations going on there, and if you be a fly in the wall in some of the meetings leading up to the next election, will be very interesting. Now, China has actually had been working on this, and they took a hint on the first Trump. They currently export about $400 billion to the U.S. It represents less than 6% of China's GDP. It was up around 8% during Trump's first term. So they've lowered that. They've looked at, they're exporting a lot more to other areas of the world. Of course, in the end, and wherever it comes, 10% is still 10%. I think, what does it come? There's $3.5 trillion the US imports. So if you put a 10% tariff on there, you're up around 350, $400 million worth of new tax revenue, which is $1 billion, which is very significant. But that's all it is. I believe it's just very simple, okay, in the approach. And if you look at different changes, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, but it comes down to that. It's a revenue. Uh, can't call it a tax, but it increases the revenue. I thought the statement at the bottom was interesting. It was by a very seasoned, I should put footnotes, but I get carried away when I'm doing this. Global trade is much about patience and positioning as it is about immediate gain. So I think most countries will be going through that in the next months. 41. I think so my old admission is probably going to be around 10%. I don't think that'll go away. The whole objective is revenues. And the old one, win some, lose some, but you live to fight another day. And I think most other countries in the world are, and keep an eye on all markets, how that's going. So anyway, if I've said before, you'll see there is if you want a copy of the presentation or you have any questions, you can contact me, Mike, Sam. So, any questions?
Thanks, Bob. A lot of interesting information there. Yeah, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself or put your hand up in the notice or type something in the chat. See anything right now?
But I think if you see as we go over the next months, if you think back over how taxes and revenues, and of course Trump's relationship to certain companies, um, it'll be a lot easier to understand rather than try and look and say this trade stuff's stupid. It's not going to work in this, but it will generate revenues.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like any questions at this point. So you've either answered everyone's questions or confused them. But a lot of kind of interesting aspects about the digital world and all the tax savings that are going on that companies can
Yeah,
take advantage of.
I looked at a number of examples, and some of them were huge. If you think again about Apple, of course, the making of the phone and the value in there is only actually a small part. So they're charging copyrights for all their digital and this and that, and all that money is moving in different places. It's huge.
I assume there's some major Canadian corporations are doing this as well.
Yeah. You have to, if you're making a product, building a car, it's kind of difficult to do that. But if you're in the digital medium and you can slice it off, they are. And in some ways, you can't fault them. Okay, if you're in business, and your business has to satisfy your stockholders. It has to be able to attract investors. And if everybody else is doing this, okay, then you are not going to be successful. because your return to the investor is going to be lower than your neighbor. And that's not how you do business. You don't mind, I used to say in banking, is I don't mind competing as a bank, but I did a lot of strategic sourcing. I don't want to compete on the price of a paperclip. That's not part of what I do. I'll compete on interest rates, but forget about the rest of it. You need to neutralize this.
All right. Well,
Hey,
thank
Mike,
you,
I just
everyone.
want to, Mike, I just want to make a couple of announcements
Sure.
for everybody on the call. We have some Sam Alcata with CHPTA and COPA. I just wanted to let everybody make everybody aware that we do have a tariff conversation on our Slack channel. It's open to both communities, the COPA world and also the CHPTA world. If you have any questions or any questions you want answered, we have an open forum that we ask everybody to put onto the Slack tariff channel, and we'll try to do the best we can. If we don't have the answers, somebody in the group will have the answers. It's just an ongoing Slack conversation that is up there. We'll forward the Slack, I guess, opportunity for you to sign up on. It's pretty simple once you're on. If I can do it, I think anybody can. So that was number one. Number two, I just want to make everybody aware that on May 6th, we're having a session from Environics and a few key speakers that are coming in to talk about what's happening in Canada with the repatriating of Canadian products through Canadian consumers. We've got Environics who's going to be doing a full out presentation. And we've got 5 or 6 key retailers that are going to be talking about what they're doing to repatriate Canadian consumers to Canadian products. So hopefully you'll make it out May 6th, and hopefully we'll see you on the Slack channel talking about tariffs.
Thanks, Sam. And yeah, I just wanted to mention too that we record the webinars, and if you want a copy of the slide presentation, you can follow up with myself or Bob or Sam. So the recordings are posted on the CHPTA and COPA websites in the resource library area, which is just requires a password, so you can follow up with myself to get a password to access that page, and you'll find copy of reports and webinar recordings as well. So, all right then. Well, doesn't look like we have any questions. So again, thank you for attending and this webinar this morning, and for hopefully reading the reports that come out every month. So we look forward to hopefully talking to you next month. So have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Yes.